The entire fruit stall collapsed in a single violent second. Wood cracked, baskets flipped, and bright piles of oranges, apples, and guavas scattered across the dusty ground as Jack was thrown slightly off balance, his hand still gripping the edge of the table that no longer stood upright, while the roar of a motorbike echoed through the narrow market path and people turned all at once, startled, confused, until their eyes landed on him. And then on A Páo. The engine stopped. Silence fell. A Páo sat on his motorbike just a few steps away, one foot on the ground, his expression smug, almost amused, as if what had just happened was nothing more than a small inconvenience, or worse, something intentional. Jack's chest rose slowly. His eyes dropped to the ground. Fruit everywhere. Bruised. Dirty. Ruined. For a brief moment he didn't move. Didn't speak. But something inside him tightened. Hard. Then he stepped forward. Fast. Before anyone could react, Jack grabbed A Páo by the collar and pulled him down from the motorbike with a sharp, controlled force, the bike tilting to the side as A Páo stumbled, barely catching himself before falling. "What are you doing?" someone shouted. The crowd instantly gathered. Voices rose. "What's going on?" "Jack, stop. Don't cause trouble." But Jack didn't let go. His grip was firm. His eyes locked onto A Páu's. "You think this is funny?" Jack's voice was low, but every word cut through the noise. A Páo smirked, brushing off his shoulder as if nothing had happened. "You were in the way. That was it. No apology. No regret. Just arrogance." Jack's jaw clenched. "You kicked my stall. So what?" A Páo shrugged. "It's just fruit." The crowd shifted uneasily. But then something changed. Not in Jack. In them. Because slowly whispers started turning. Not toward A Páo, but toward Jack. "You shouldn't grab him like that. That's A Páo. He's the village chief's nephew. Don't make trouble." Jack heard it. Every word. Clear. Sharp. And suddenly the situation flipped. From victim to aggressor. Páo noticed too. His smirk grew wider. "See," he said quietly, leaning closer. "You don't belong here." Jack's grip tightened for a second. Then he let go. A Páo adjusted his shirt, stepping back with a satisfied expression, glancing around at the villagers who avoided eye contact, who chose silence over fairness, because no one wanted to offend power. And for a moment, Jack stood there alone, in the middle of a crowd, with no one on his side. Slowly, he crouched down, one knee to the ground, and began picking up the fruit, one by one. No anger. No shouting. Just quiet. Heavy. Acceptance. The dirt clung to his hands. The fruit was damaged. But he kept going. Because what else could he do? At that exact moment, Tử Tiên. Someone called out. She had just returned. A small paper bag in her hand. Warm bonbon inside. Still fresh. Still soft. She froze the second she saw the scene. The broken stall. The fruit scattered everywhere. Jack on the ground. Picking. Silently. Her grip tightened. The bag slipped slightly in her hand. What happened? No one answered. No one dared. Until her eyes landed on A Páo. Standing. Unbothered. Watching. That was enough. Tử Tiên dropped the bag. Walked forward. Fast. Her footsteps sharp against the ground. She stopped right in front of A Páo. "What did you do?" A Páo tilted his head. "Relax. It was an accident." Her eyes burned. That was not an accident. The tension snapped instantly. People stepped back. Cause this was different. Jack finally looked up. "Tien, it's okay." "No," she cut him off without looking back. "It's not." Páo chuckled. "You're really going to defend him again?" "Yes." "No hesitation." No doubt. Just one word. Clear. Strong. And this time, didn't just affect A Páo. It affected everyone. "He kicked the stall," someone whispered. Another voice followed. "I saw it too." "He did it on purpose." The tone shifted. Slowly, but surely. A Páu's smile faded. He looked around. And for the first time, he wasn't in control. Tử Tiên stipet cơ. Her voice lower now. Sharper. "You think just because of your uncle, you can do whatever you want?" A Páu's expression darkened. "Watch your words." "No," she said. "You should." The crowd grew louder. More voices joined. He went too far. This isn't right. Even if he's the chief's nephew. Jack stayed where he was, still on the ground, still holding a piece of fruit in his hand. But this time, he wasn't alone anymore. A Páo clicked his tongue, clearly annoyed, his eyes flashing with anger as the situation slipped away from him. You're all taking his side now, he scoffed. No one answered directly, but no one defended him either. And that said everything. He stepped back, pointed at Jack. This isn't over. His voice was cold. A warning. A threat. Just wait. Then he turned, got back on his motorbike and sped off, the engine roaring louder than before, leaving behind dust, tension, and unfinished conflict. Silence lingered for a moment. Then someone bent down, picked up an apple, placed it back in the basket. Then another person joined. Then another. One by one, the villagers stepped forward, helping pick up the fallen fruit, brushing off dirt, stacking what could still be saved, rebuilding the stall piece by piece.
Tử Tiên nen lét bê sai dắt.
Her hands moving quickly, carefully. She didn't speak, but her presence said enough. Jack looked at her, then at the people around him, and for the first time since the stall fell, his chest felt lighter, not because nothing was broken, but because something else had been built. The last piece of fruit was placed back onto the stall with care, and for a brief moment, the market felt quieter than usual, not because people had stopped talking, but because something had shifted in the air, something deeper than just a broken stall or a heated argument, something that lingered between respect, tension, and an unspoken understanding that what had just happened would not be forgotten so easily. Jack remained crouched for a few seconds longer, his hands still resting lightly on the wooden edge of the stall, his breathing steady now, his expression calmer, but not empty like before, because this time when he looked up, he didn't see judgment. He saw people, real people, standing beside him, helping him, choosing him. Tử Tiên stood up slowly, brushing the dust off her hands, her eyes still fixed in the direction A Páo had disappeared. Her jaw slightly tight, not out of fear, but because she knew exactly what that warning meant. This isn't over. She repeated the words in her mind, and she believed them. But when she turned back to Jack, her expression softened. You okay? She asked quietly. Jack nodded once. I am. It wasn't a lie. Not completely. Because even though the problem wasn't gone, something inside him had changed again. He stood up, looked at the stall, still a bit crooked, still imperfect, but standing, just like him. Here, an older woman said, handing him a small cloth. Clean these first. Jack took it. Thank you. Another man adjusted one of the wooden legs of the stall. It'll hold, he said. Just be careful. Jack gave a small nod. And for the first time since arriving in the village, he didn't feel like an outsider being tolerated. He felt like someone worth standing up for. Tử Tiên bent down, picking up the bag she had dropped earlier. The bonbons inside were slightly crushed now. Still warm. Still soft. She looked at them for a second, then walked over to Jack. Here, she said, holding one out. Jack blinked. After all that? She shrugged lightly. You still need to eat. A faint smile appeared on his face. He took it. Their fingers brushed. Just for a second, but enough. They stood side by side behind the stall again. Like before. But not the same. Customers slowly returned. Some hesitant at first, then more confident. A few smiled. A few nodded. No one mentioned what happened directly, but their actions said enough. They stayed. They bought. They supported. Jack, one man said as he handed over money, you handled that well. Jack paused. I didn't do much. The man shook his head. Sometimes. Not losing yourself is everything. Jack didn't answer, but he understood. As the sun began to lower again, casting long golden light across the market, the chaos of earlier felt like something distant, but not gone, not forgotten, just waiting. Because A Páo words still echoed. And both Jack and Tử Tiên knew. Peace like this doesn't last without a price. On the edge of the village, hidden behind a cluster of trees, A Páo stood once more, his motorbike parked beside him, his eyes fixed on the market from afar, watching the small figures moving, laughing, continuing their lives as if he hadn't just been pushed aside. His fingers tightened slowly. "They think they can turn against me," he muttered. His gaze hardened, especially when it landed on Jack. Standing there, belonging. That was the part he couldn't accept. Not the argument, not the crowd, but the fact that Jack had taken his place. Back at the stall, Tử Tiên leaned slightly toward Jack. "We should be careful for a while," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "I know." A short pause. Then, "Are you scared?" she asked. Jack looked at her, not immediately answering. Then, "No," he said. But his tone wasn't reckless. It wasn't pride. It was calm, grounded. "Because I'm not alone." Tử Tiên held his gaze for a second, then looked away. But her lips curved slightly. The wind moved gently through the market again. The same as always. But everything felt just a little different now. 'Cause sometimes, it's not the fight that defines people. It's what happens after. As they packed up their stall later that evening, Jack lifted the last basket onto his shoulder, glancing once more at the path where A Páo had left. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. Stronger, clearer, ready. 'Cause whatever came next, he wouldn't face it the same way as before. And as he walked beside Tử Tiên, the two of them side by side under the fading light, the story didn't end. It only shifted into something more dangerous, more real, and far from over.